Alexis Morgan, you're back. How are you?
I feel so good to be back. It's been a long time since I've been in the studio.
It has been a long time, and you have been all across the country, quite literally. You went from coast to coast. You went down south. You've been everywhere talking education.
I have. It's been really cool, actually. So I went to Minneapolis and was at the National Community Schools and Family Engagement Conference. I was over in DC at it was all about like speaking up for public education and no to vouchers. And they asked me, which was like so cool for Idaho specifically, to speak at a national press conference. And so I got to share the Idaho story, and I got to share the perspective of a parent at this national what did I just say it was?
Press conference.
Press conference.
There it is.
There's conference, convention. There's like a couple of them.
Press conference. That's different.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I got to do that. And then and then went on a vacation with my family down to Florida in the mix of all of this. And then I went to San Antonio, Texas for funsies. Like my BFF from college, I saw her last fall and she was like, hey, let's get together. Yes, absolutely. That sounds so much fun. What could we do? This was last fall. And she said, hey, why don't you come to this conference that I'm going to be at?
Right.
Okay, sure. And she is a digital literacy coach in Kentucky for her school district. And I thought, sure. She has a room. I'll just stay in the room with her. I'll just pay I'll pay the fee to get in and pay for my ticket, but then we can just like hang out. So I end up going to the National Tech Ed convention in the nation. It was like unintentional. And I learned so much stuff from all these companies in the expo and from my friend and her, the guy in the district. He's the Chief Information Officer for his district. And I think that's what they're called. And unintentionally. Does that make sense? I feel like I happened into this space.
Oh, what are all these people doing here?
Yeah. And it was really cool because I learned so much stuff, and it almost feels like serendipitous because you and I have done so much conversation and work in the tech space for kids in Idaho. So that's why it felt really cool. So, and then here I am, after 2.5 months of not seeing you, here I am in the studio with you.
Oh my gosh. Listen to me. I've had a couple conversations in recent times about, once the school choice bill, was passed in Idaho, there was a big push in the public education sphere for okay, what is it that people want? Obviously, the fact that school choice passed and there's whatever degree of support for it within the state, be it a lot or a little, whatever you want to say, there is a question of, okay, we're collecting these dollars, we're running a public education system. Is a public education the education that people want, and is it being run the way people want? Let's have this conversation. Mm-hmm. And people continually bring up the idea of technology as this great savior towards our kids. And they frequently point to international examples like China. It's like China's doing so much with education. Now, mind you, at the same time, you have videos of kids in China with headbands on that are tracking their brain waves to see if they're not paying attention and stuff. It's okay, do we want that? No, we don't. Great. And again, a broader conversation of what should our relationship to technology be? Do we need technology to be this great, customizable entity in the education system? Do we need it at all? Because again, just to remind you, 2 of my children go to a school that is a no-tech school, and the idea that they're going to be ill-prepared for the workforce is laughable in my mind, but what do I know, right? So it's okay, what should the relationship be with technology in public schools? So my question to you really is what was it at the tech conference was there something where oh, this is it, this is the silver bullet, or this is the promise that technology brings in the education sphere? Or is it actually, maybe there is some value here, and we all understand our kids need to understand technology as they get bigger, but there was no smoking gun where you're okay, this is why 5th graders everywhere need tech?
Yeah. So 2 things. One, I'm just going to clarify really quickly that school choice bill that you're talking about was classified as school choice. It was not school choice. It was about getting public dollars into private schools. We already have school choice in Idaho. We have 9 different options of school choice. Idaho is a leader in education school choice in the nation. A lot of states look to Idaho to see how we do it. So that is something that I just kind of want to put out there. And because Idaho is so we have so many options, 94% of our Idaho kids, though, attend public schools, and that is traditional brick and mortar and also charter schools. 94% of our kids. So to your point of, hey, people have been going around the state asking questions like, what is it that we want from our public schools? That's awesome, because 94% of our 94% of our kids are attending public schools. So it's an important question to be asking. And then to your point of like, okay, here I go to this tech ed conference and what am I learning about? Well, that question, that very question, my BFF from college and I wrestled with, because here she is, a digital learning coach, helping to incorporate technology into a classroom. And here Alexis comes to this convention with the premise of like, I think we have too much tech in schools.
Right.
I would like the removal of some of the tech time that kids are in. So my BFF and I are kind of like having this wrestling conversation the entire time we're together, which was really awesome because she had her perspective of, hey, there are some really incredible things with technology, specifically that her school district has done to streamline the parent experience, to make sure that student data is private and safe, to help teachers use technology in a way that is going to positively impact their experience, but also make sure that the tech that is being incorporated into the classroom is appropriate for its usage.
Yeah. Listen, I don't know what you're going to tell me that you guys came up with or what magical thing she did in her district, but that last piece, it's like, listen to me. I'm not anti-tech. If my kid at any age is like, hey, I want to learn video editing, hell yeah, man, let me teach you. Or if your school has a coding class, yeah, you're going to need tech to code. Or if you have a graphic design class, multimedia, not just, hand, but also just like, yeah, man, you want to take Photoshop? You're going to need some tech. I'm all for all of that. I love Photoshop. I love graphic design. I love all of it. But I love all of it with the tech in those classes. I don't love tech in history every day. I don't love tech in English every day. I don't love tech in math every day, right? Like we used to get in trouble if they found out that on our Texas Instruments TI-84 calculators, we had downloaded the, what was it like? There was an Independence Day game where it was like that one little pixel. I remember people would be like, look, I'm Will Smith. That's Will Smith. And it was like, and you're like shooting the alien. Like that was it. Or we had these dumb games on our calculators that we would get in trouble for having back in 1998. And now all of a sudden we're like, oh no, they absolutely have to have this computer or they can't learn anything. It's like, that's not appropriate. So what are the cool things that your friend was doing in their district with tech?
I would say that what is so cool about what they're doing is that they have digital learning coaches who are going out and finding the best way to incorporate tech into specific usages like math.
Is that a word? Usages? I think it's usages.
Yeah. Into the curriculum.
It is.
Yeah, into the curriculum. So they're finding very specific ways to incorporate it into the curriculum. So for example, when I was walking around with them, I heard her companion say, hey, this would be so, I want to specifically find something that's going to help our math teachers because math is different than English and history. So we want to make sure that whatever we're going to find here is going to help our math teachers, let's say in elementary school, let's say in 5th grade, right? When they're learning something, what would be specific to that? Because what's going to help them in 5th grade is going to be different than what is going to be integrated into a high school classroom. So, and what was interesting was in our conversation, my friend initially, there was some frustration from her towards me because I kept saying, I want to limit the amount of tech that's in a classroom. And she would say, Lex, as a math teacher, I had so many positive experiences incorporating technology in this way. And I was like, I hear you. And I'm not taking that away from you, but I'm telling you as a parent, I have seen it incorporated in this, and this way. And what you're describing is not the same as what I am seeing over here. So and kind of at the end of the whole thing, she kind of had this aha moment, kind of what it felt like, where she came to me and she was like, I finally get your perspective. I hear what you're saying. And actually, you being here the entire time has benefited my whole team, because you've been asking questions that have been so important for us to make sure that we can answer as professionals in this space. And I was like, that's so cool, because I feel like I learned so much from them in what they've been doing. And so one of the things that I felt like was so cool was that when I was like thinking about like what we have in Idaho, I don't know that we have digital learning coaches who are specific not to a curriculum path, but to the digital space in general. And that was something that their district has that I feel like is really cool, because then it's not laying the burden on the teacher who is the curriculum expert to then go out and try to figure out what type of tech is going to be the best used in my classroom for this thing. And that to me is something that I think is so important. That's kind of one piece that I wanted to cover was that.
And if I may, that also hits continuity between teachers, right? So you don't have one math teacher who's super heavy on tech and another math teacher who's not super heavy on tech. Kids are having completely distinct experiences. So, and then it's like, well, you know, kids categorically aren't on tech that much. It's like, yeah, but your kids are on tech 50 minutes every day of that math class and not on that one. So how do we even know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then like to your example, then we have a more kind of like, to your point, like a more streamlined experience, but it's not that I'm not going to put air quotes around being monitored in a way that teachers are being monitored, but in a way that the district is much more aware of the type of tools that are being integrated into the classroom.
Right.
Which is really important, because the next component that I heard a lot of, and I think everyone's been hearing about online, is this premise of AI. And I think when people hear about AI, it's like this, oh yeah, it's this automatic thought of like, well, kids are going on Chat GPT and they are just having Chatty G write an essay for them. And that's not what we want our kids. We want our kids to be critical thinkers. And I have heard how teachers have used Chatty G to help kids in their critical thinking. Like, so they've incorporated it in a way that allows for that it is seen as a tool and not a way to cheat. But what is interesting, and something that I learned from a lot of different companies that were at this tech conference, was that AI, and I might like, I'm not an AI guru. Okay. I'm not an AI anything other than I am kind of curious.
Sure.
Is that when we go in and use AI, it's learning from us, and you and I are adults. And so, you know, when we're using it, we consent to that component. But there are some AI resources that our kids are using in school that AI is harvesting their data and using it to make their product better. And that's where some of these, and I was talking to some companies, like there was this one company that was started by a bunch of college students. And when they were talking about their service, and part of it was an AI component, they said one of the things that we do is protect student data. And we don't harvest that. And we don't use student data to make our product better. And so that's something that I think in my limited amount right now of knowing about is making sure that's one level of making sure that our kids are safe from these products, is that, hey, these products are not using our kids to make their product better.
That actually amazingly, completely different industry, but in the legal field, there is a big push for attorneys to use AI in research. And my father-in-law, who happens to be an attorney, started asking like, hey, is it saving my questions? Is it learning from my questions? Is it revising the answers it gives somebody else based on my questions? And a lot of the people he spoke with initially were like, we don't know. He's like, listen, if I ask a very specific question of this thing and it comes up with a specific answer, is that informing, the opposition, right? With defense or, whatever it is. And that's a huge problem. And again, harvesting data. I mean, just think about how much consent we have to give for anything around kids. You and I both have kids in Idaho public schools right now. Mm-hmm. Do we have any idea who's collecting our data, our kids' data? Do we have any idea if companies have profiles on our kids? Do we have any idea if the school even knows or the districts even know who's collecting data off of our children that is, and again, by the way, that technology being given to our children by the schools. So do we know these things? I think, and Senator Tammy Nichols is actually very concerned about this as well, and has been very critical of like who has the data, right? And who consented to that data collection and distribution? These are questions that I think, at least in Idaho, remain to be determined, which is like who's, I wouldn't say stealing, but who's allowing the harvesting of Idaho children's data.
Yeah, so some of that I think plays into a conversation that I had with a guy who understands, I would say, data in Idaho, and we do have like the State Board of Education. They do have a committee that has like this data privacy policy, and in that data privacy policy, it kind of lays out some of these things. That there are some things that is determined by the state that schools are required to get a consent for. And there are other things that schools are not required to get a consent for, that there's an automatic kind of different things that play out. And this is not something that public schools are deciding. This is something on a state level. And so what ends up happening, and this kind of played out with Google Additional Services, was that Google Additional Services got their hand slapped big time, and they had a major fine from this national policy, because Google Additional Services were taking information from children younger than, it was 13 and under.
Sure.
Okay. And they were using that. And that's a big no-no when it comes to, I think it's called COPPA. And it is called COPPA. And I can't remember what what that acronym stands for at this moment. But so essentially what happened was, because of that, all of these Google Additional Services, so I would say like YouTube, even Google Maps,
Right.
If a school district wanted to use that, Google required them to get a signature. Google, because they were required by this, by the punishment essentially, was to get a signature from the parents. Well, most of the school districts in Idaho use Google. It's my understanding there's only 2 districts that use Microsoft. Everyone else uses Google because their computers are so much cheaper and their services are free. A lot of their services are free. But the state, because of how things play out on the state level, districts determined that they were not going to get permission from parents. Therefore, they were going to cut those services off. And so it's far more complicated than what I'm describing here.
No, I got you.
But it was really interesting, like, oh, okay, the law, as I understood it, how it's in place, protected our Idaho kids from just having that kind of like automatic consent. To know if we want to do that, you have to get a signature from a parent, and you have to have a copy of it specific to this. And so it was my understanding, this played out in the Boise School District. The Boise School District said, nope, we're going to cut off YouTube when it comes to those types of things, because of that, because of wanting to keep our kids safe. So I thought that was a good play out for us.
Yeah, that's a positive thing. If I may ask, and again, just on the idea, you brought up math and you brought up, younger kids. And in particular, math is one of those things where you can really just drill and kill, right? And first time I got introduced to this as a younger person was with Kumon, right? Because Kumon, they do thousands and thousands and thousands of problems. And it's like, listen, muscle memory, you're going to do this equation a gajillion times and you're not even going to have to think about it. Okay. And that there is a place for that in the world. Like we should all know our multiplication tables like the back of our hand. Fine. But that also is not necessarily the way to continue with math education, because, math is really like an art and you got to start feeling it and, messing around with it, at least in my opinion. In the math world and tech, the gamification of math, and where it's like, okay, your little guy is, I've seen these math programs before. Some of them were on my kids' former school computers when we finally took them away and like got rid of them. But it would be a game that they're playing, like some fantasy game. They're like a wizard. They're trying to like cast a spell and you have to do the math equation correctly. But if they're playing that game for an hour, they're literally doing math for maybe 5 minutes, because then the rest of it is the graphics and the playing out, and then the dragons firing a fireball and like, oh my God. And then like, oh, you have to respond. What's, 10 plus 5, right? Something like that. It's like, oh, so it's this tiny, tiny time frame within an entire game ecosystem where you are doing math. Fine, you're doing a little bit of math, but you're also just gamifying everything. And like, that's not the world. That's having your kids trapped on a video game. They might learn a little bit something else, but you have to tolerate them being on a video game, right? And what if that's not great? And by the way, when you take those video games away, you have the same anxiety, the same problems as if they weren't learning. So, okay, the trade-off is your kid might get a little bit better at math over this time frame, but when you go to take the game away, they're going to lose their crap, which I saw time and time again. And I've talked to parent after parent about like, my kid still flips out like I'm stealing the Xbox, right? Yeah, the argument is a little bit better video game, but it's still a game. And having our kids trapped on games all the time is not a good idea.
Totally. And I will say that I think it's so important for parents and also for educators to be aware that when I went into the space of the Tech Ed conference, right, and I'm there and I walked into the Expo Center, one of the things that hit me, and the Expo Center, this is where every company has come, you know, they have like descended upon this tech conference to share their product with educators.
And these are products. These are for-profit companies. Maybe not every single one, but a lot of them. They're like, we figured out a way to get a little bit of public education money.
Yeah,
just buy my thing.
And let me be really clear that there is a lot of money in public education because most of our kids in the United States, 90% of our United States kids are in public education. Okay, so there's a lot of money to be had in this space. And I'm not knocking businesses that are in this space because we need businesses in this space. And there were some really great like nonprofits. Like there was this one nonprofit, it's called We Are Teachers, and they are, they're not technically a nonprofit. They are a for-profit entity, but they give free resources to teachers. Right. So my teacher friends, if you have not checked out We Are Teachers, definitely go check it out because it's a free resource for you. There are other groups in there like T-Mobile, and T-Mobile is in there to highlight what they are doing specifically for education and partnering with different school districts to help kids with connectivity and making sure that kids have access to the internet so they can complete their assignments at home. So there's not like a deficit there. So there's a lot of great things happening in this space. Okay. So, but when I was standing there and I kind of like looked around, I was like, oh, holy cow. There is so much money to be had in this space. And some of these education tech companies are incredible. And like what I saw was remarkable. And there are other ones who are specifically advertising for, to your point, the gamification of education. And they're not quiet about it. They're not hiding it. They say like gamified experience. And it's like, whoa. And what I learned from my friend was that, you know what, in math, the gamified experience did help some of her math students.
Sure.
It did. It was some of these kids who were really behind on some of these things. It did help them. And I have a suspicion, I haven't read studies, but I have a suspicion as to maybe that's why it helped them. But to your point, too much gamification is happening in the classroom because these companies have gotten in and because teachers have this as a resource for them. And so they're using it to help these children. I have heard some experts talk about how a couple of reasons gamification is no good. One, to your point, they're getting 5 minutes of math and 55 minutes of gameplay, right? So that's no good. But second, part of this has to do with a child's like dopamine experience.
I was just going to say the gamification only works if the value that the kid gets out of the game is greater than the pain of doing the math. So then the play becomes make this as addictive and rewarding as humanly possible so they will tolerate the pain of doing the math. And then we're back into the whole cycle of our kids being addicted to tech.
Well, and it is... So I'm reading this book. It's called ADHD is Awesome. And one of my family members has ADHD. And so ADHD is Awesome is it's this incredible book. I'm like loving it. And it's by...
One of your podcast buddies has ADHD too.
It's written by Penn and Kim Holderness. They're an online couple that I think is like super awesome. They do like a lot of like content, and I watched them when they were on The Amazing Race, and they won The Amazing Race, and I like loved watch them they like work together in such an incredible way. And it was on the show that they really highlighted how cool ADHD is. And so anyways, I'm reading this book, and one of the things that they're talking about is the difference between ADHD and socialized behavior. And as they kind of break down some of these things, they're like, this is ADHD, this is what this looks like, and this is why it's happening for some of our kids in the classroom. This is what socialized behavior looks like. This is what it looks like when our kids are being kind of socialized to have short attention spans, to need this quick dopamine hit. And so what gamification does is it actually might be beneficial for some of our ADHD kids, because
Sure.
ADHD, it's my understanding that they have like less dopamine in the brain and yada, yada, yada in this book that's been like super cool to read. But gamification of education is not helping a majority of children because of the socialization that it's causing them to behave in a specific way. And this is what experts are talking about. This is what you were just referencing. That when we have this gamification of education in a way that is getting this hit for kids, is that we are teaching their brains that they need that hit all the time in order to have a good experience, in order to interact with learning, in order to be able to sit through a dinner in a restaurant. That's what we're teaching kids. And that is very different from someone who has some other maybe neurotypical experience, right? And so I think that that's something that's really important that I've been learning about, and that I think it's important for us to remember, that to your point and to experts, the gamification is what is creating this negative socialized experience for kids. Part of what's contributing to it.
Dude, I have a funny, ridiculous one for you. That's right. Okay, so I have a buddy of mine from college, great guy, incredibly brilliant, and graduates from Cal with an engineering, physics, geophysics, and a minor in mechanical engineering. So 2.5 degrees. Right? God, I wasted my life. Super brilliant guy, goes to work for this very small company that its sole job was essentially retrofitting steam plants to become more efficient. So if you're like Del Monte, you're like a packing plant, you deal with a lot of steam, you're canning peaches, whatever they might be, and you're losing a whole lot of energy because you need steam. And they're like, okay, we can come and make it more efficient. Part of that was upgrading the control mechanisms for these steam generation plants. And they put these touchscreens on. Now, mind you, this is like the mid 2000s, so 2007, 2008. So, iPads weren't everywhere. The iPhone was just coming out. And you had these old salty steam plant operators who were like, I'm not getting on the touch screen. Like, that's whatever. So the guy who designed the touch screen and the whole thing was like, hey, I put some cool stuff on there. And the old salty guys were like, whatever. He's like, you should check it out. And so what he had done is he put disappearing porn on the touch screens. Okay, hang with me. So these salty guys would be like hitting one thing, and then all of a sudden like a naked lady popped up. They're like, what? And then it would disappear. And they're like, whoa, how'd you get back to that? So then they started telling their friends, they're like, okay, this is what you do. Go into the main channel, go into like the Steam, blah, 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 hit all these buttons. And they started learning these navigation trees to find the naked ladies, right? And he was like, they learned these systems instantaneously because now you had dudes that were spending hours a day navigating through the touchscreen. So they knew exactly where everything was because they were going to find the naked ladies, right? Like, this is real. This is real. And it's like, I didn't do this. This is just something that was being done. But it's that kind of incentivization structure where it's like, okay, so they'll learn this, but only if you give them porn. And how does that play out with them in the future? Does that make them better people? Like the next plant they go to when they have to learn a new touchscreen, are they going to be like, I ain't doing it unless you put porn on there, right? Like, have you made them better? Or have you just like played into like, let's go after the most base incentivization structure possible for the short-term benefit, right? Because again, you're not going to get gamification in calculus, right? You're not, I remember my parents had split up and my mom went to college as they were breaking up. And I remember it was like 10, she was going through, accounting and she was taking calculus. I remember her doing these like 3-page equations that me as a 10 and 11-year-old, I didn't really understand. Like, why would you ever need 3 pages for one? And then I was going through calculus in high school and I'm like, oh, this is the 3 pages. Like, here we go. And you're going through. It's like, there's no gamification that's going to get you through those operations. Like, you're going to have sustained capacity. And to your point, as we're socializing a lower and lower and lower attention span to get a certain outcome, education, you've become educated in these things. But the trade-off is, I just sacrificed your capacity to stay, pay attention for a long period of time. That's not good for, like, maybe that helps some people, but that's not an overwhelming silver bullet that people are like, let's just make all these. And then what are you going to do? Calculus to put porn on it for like the 18-year-old dudes? That's a bad idea.
That's a very bad idea.
That's a very bad idea.
That's a very bad idea. I will say that there is, I was just listening to an expert that talked about how actually our attention spans have been lowered, like with our kids.
Oh, yeah.
They've done studies. The attention span is lowered, and it is because I think, it's in part because I think technology has been introduced in a way that is not helping kids. And I heard someone say, and I really like it, it's like, hey, whoa, you know what? We're not going to point fingers as to like who got us here and why.
I'm pointing fingers for sure.
Okay, you can.
Okay.
But the fact is, we are here. We are at this, in my mind, like a crossroad. And we as adults need to do something about it. Like, we need to help make sure that our kids are having the greatest learning environments that they can. That are not socializing bad characteristics or reinforcing limited attention span for later in life. And for Pete's sake, it's like, it is 2025. We have the capacity to make such incredible learning environments for our kids. We owe it to them to figure out how to do that. And I feel like I almost feel like a little bit of a deja vu. Like, we've had this conversation before, just in terms of like, hey, our kids, we owe it to our kids. Like, as adults, we owe it to our kids to step up to the table and to have this conversation. And I really get tired of the people who are like, nah, you've had 30 years, you've had 50 years to figure this out. It's like, at what point in time has there, okay, so first of all, I've not been around for 50 years, so we're going to get rid of that one. But second, like, the premise that we can't at any point say, hey, this is the way that we've done it, but we want to make it better. We can do that at any time. And I feel like now is the time to make sure that we're having this conversation. And it seems like, and what I've been observing is that people are having this conversation on the state level, they're having it at local levels, and they're having it on the national level. I see people, there have been things that I feel like have brought the party to two different parties together. And some of that has been for the benefit and protection of our kids. And so I feel like this is a space that we really should start doing that for our kids specifically. My gosh, we're in Idaho. We have the capacity to do this. So we should do it because our kids deserve it.
I agree with everything you've said. The one thing that I come back to when I hear people say, hey, public schools had 50 years to figure this out. Okay. Does anybody have a better functioning alternative? And I'm not saying that there can't be progress made anywhere, but I had lots of people on about the school choice / vouchers. And my question to all of them was like, point to the best private school that you can find. I want to see it. I'm for education. However we have to get our kids educated, we need to leverage the American youth mind as hard as possible to stay a world leader. That's just a fact. Okay. Now, if there's a private school somewhere that's like, hey, we got this licked. We have kids in calculus by 8th grade consistently. Hey, what did you do? What did you do? Let me know. What I don't understand is that people say private schools are the answer when no one can produce a stellar private school that doesn't have like a 1-to-1 student teacher ratio, right? Like there was this school called Tilden Prep back in my former life as an educator. And one gal I was working with whose father had a whole lot of money, she was not doing well in the standard, high school that she was going to. They started at Tilden Prep. It focused on one-on-one master level learning. So they only gave her the test to say AP stat or to, government or whatever, when they knew she would get an A- or better. Now you're like, dude, that's not fair. Okay. Yes. But they also were like, no, you wouldn't pass this test yet. I'm going to keep teaching you. And she did, in fact, then have to take the test. So in that way, I was like, well, this seems kind of goofy, but I guess at the end of the day, if she can pass the calculus test, then she's passing the calculus test. I just think it's silly that they're only going to give it to her when they know they can get an A. The flip side is they knew when she was prepared. Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, that's great. Who's doing 1-to-1 education? Who has the time frame with this volume of students and this funding to do that kind of education with a variable length semester, either shorter or faster with this? You can't do that. So again, I'm all for all education. And if somebody's like, hey, public education has been failing our kids, we need a new model, that's fine. Where's the model? And why are you assuming that these companies are doing it better? And if they are, God bless them. What's the secret sauce? I'm all for all of that. But I have yet to have anybody point to a single school.
Yeah, so you bring up a lot of really good points. And one of them is public education represents the public. Just like when public lands were about to be up for sale not that long ago. This was just, it feels like just like a week or two ago. Right. And people went nuts over the sale of our public lands. And in part because they feel ownership over those lands. There are public lands. We want to be able to have access to them. We don't want that to be privatized. All these different things. People felt a level of ownership for that. People don't feel a level of ownership for public education. People did not get up in arms when vouchers started. People were like, oh yeah, I want a different option. Yes, yes, yes. I want the public to pay for my option.
Now, to be fair, when there was public polling in the governor's office about whether or not you wanted the bill to pass, there was a conclusive response from the public.
86% of Idahoans said no.
That responded.
86% of those that responded said, no, we don't want vouchers. And yes, you're right. I think like deep down, people are like, oh no, that doesn't make sense to me. But in the initial, I'm talking about in the initial response on social media, people were in everyone on both sides of the aisle were like, we don't want the sale of our public lands.
Right.
But when it's come to vouchers, people have not come to bat for public education in the same way that they've come to bat for public lands. So my point is, for whatever reason, there feels like there is this lack of ownership for public education, even though a majority of us went to public schools. And I think part of it, if I'm just like sitting here thinking about why that may be and yada, 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 I've listened to different people talk about over the decades what has occurred with the childhood, right? Like the decline of the play-based, the rise of the phone-based childhood. That's one different thing. Then I think another thing too has been this like loss of community. There's been this disconnect that has started to occur between the individual and the community. And that really, I think, got stretched big time during COVID, where we didn't have community in real person because because we were asked to be in our homes and we were, masks on and all those different things. I don't want to go into it, but the premise that existed there. And so now we're coming out of it and it's like, well, our public schools represent what we want as a public, which is why I have seen so many communities around Idaho respond in a way that their representatives and senators who voted for the voucher system are so upset with their representatives and senators because they did not do a good job. Those who voted for vouchers, what I observed, did not do a good job in representing what their community wanted, because their community was like, whoa, but our public school is the heart of our community. It sits here and we want to be a part of that. And so I think what is so important to remember is that in the end, I don't think it's ever too late to come to the table to say, this is what we want our education system to represent. There are people around the state having this conversation right now. And I agree that I don't think that anyone has ever presented a better alternative. The fact is that kids learn differently. We're learning more about different types of children and how we can help them in their learning experience. And when we look at some private schools, they are doing a good job.
Oh, sure.
Right? Like they are doing a good job. But some of these private schools, a lot of reasons that people are sending their kids to the private schools, specifically in the Treasure Valley, is for a more religious experience.
Sure.
And I think that's important to remember, right? But then we've also got public schools, and we do have a private one, that are more project-based. They're focusing more on making sure that our students have the skills, and they're assessing kids in a way that is a project-based system. And I'm really excited because I'm having, on my show, I'm having one of the authors of The Disengaged Teen on my show to talk about the 4 different types of learners and how we can set up policies in our schools to create these types of learning environments for our kids so we can get to the more exploratory stage of learning for our students instead of some of these other stages. So I'm going to talk about that in a second. But then the other thing that I think is important to remember is that, like, you mentioned China at the beginning, and like people always reference China, like, oh my gosh, they're producing these incredible students. Great, maybe. That's probably true in some fashion, but
I don't know that they're producing incredible students.
Well,
like, let me just say, they're initiating a very specific type of education paradigm. Like that's their thing. But where innovation comes from there, where creativity comes from, where willingness to make mistakes comes from, is a much different conversation, because overwhelmingly they're like, this is time and time again. It's like, you can get people to be human calculators. They will likely refuse to do something that doesn't have a right or a wrong answer. And when you're dealing with innovation, especially at the level that the United States has done, that no other country has been able to reproduce. You have to have a large collection of highly competent people that have enough confidence that they're willing to make mistakes and they're willing to make the wrong answer, have the wrong answer and just keep moving forward, which is a completely different education culture from what you produce with like hook them up to the computer and get the right answer every time.
1,000%. And then the other thing was that I love the example of in Finland, they are producing incredible learning environments for their kids, and their kids are performing really well on different tests that they are required to take in high school. And in part because these kids are having fun when they're little and they're learning, and they're not testing the heck out of them when they're little. So I think that for the United States, but specifically for Idaho, I think that we do have a really awesome opportunity, but there is it's not like a caveat, it's a caution. I would say
Right.
here's the caution, is that we have a system, and this is how our democracy, our democratic republic is set up, in that we operate on policies. And so in order for someone to travel around the state and say, hey, I want you to think about education and I want you to think about it in a way that let's pretend we didn't have any rules. And there's a good reason to have that type of an exercise in a conversation. What I think is important to remember, though, is that here's the fact. The fact is we do have a lot of rules. We do have a lot of policies around public education.
Right.
And while we don't want education to be politicized, because these are our kids and we want them to have a great experience, you've had people in on your show to say, well, public education is political, though, because when we make policies, they come from laws, and those
laws are being derived from, blah, 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 blah.
There's, and I think what's important for us to remember is that it's our kids that are impacted. Matt, you and I aren't sitting in a classroom. We're not impacted by these things, but our kids are. And so as adults, it's important for us to protect our kids. So when we're thinking about policies, when we're thinking about laws, I think it's important for people to remember that these laws become policies, and then those policies play out in practice in a certain way. And so if we want to change what we're seeing in the classroom, let's say, for example, we don't like how many tests our kids are taking, the standardized tests. And the first standardized test comes in 3rd grade. And that standardized test, those some dollars that these school districts receive are tied to how they perform on these tests. And those schools want to make sure that kids are performing well when they take that test in the 3rd grade. And that test now is given on a computer. And so then they say, well, we want to make sure that kids know how to take tests on that computer so they can perform well, so they can actually show what they know. What that looks like is sticking a kindergartner on a computer, because that's how that policy plays out on a federal level, which then is required on the state, which then trickles all the way down into our local elementary schools. So that's what I mean by, hey, you and I as parents, like, I don't think a kindergartner should be spending any bulk of time on a computer at school.
Right.
But that decision on the local level is played out in policy on the state and even federal level. And I think that's so key for us to remember as individuals, especially as parents when we're frustrated with not everything when it comes to tech and the gamification of things, but a big part of what we're seeing then on that local level. That's important, I think, for people to remember.
I agree with you. I also like the blue background.
Yes.
Yes, overwhelmingly. And again, understanding those downstream effects from those decisions is really, really important. Over and over, and you see this. I keep coming to something you said, we're talking about like, hey, some private school might be doing a good job. And I'm sure there are, like, my kids were already out of the public school when I was in my former life in the state that shall not be named. And they were out of it, not even because there were necessarily horrendous results coming out of them, the schools academically, which is questionable because what was producing the results? Was it, the tutors that everybody had, blah, blah, blah. But it was a bad environment, right? It was not a positive environment. My kids were not thriving. It was not good. But I keep thinking it's like, we shouldn't be looking for a school. We should be asking who has the best education system, because that's all I want. Like, I want a cookbook. Okay, I want to know exactly how much salt, how many, how many grams or ounces or whatever of minced. Why is everything in grams in cookbooks, by the way? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Or like, anyway, so like I need to know those exact things, because what we want is to then be able to feed into it the entirety of the United States youth and get out a good result. You're only getting that if you have a system, not if you have a good school. Right? Like I was a private educator. I had my own little SAT class. I'm not telling you I had a fantastic system. Like I had a good system that meshed with me as an educator, because I'm high energy and I would be able to go around like I had a good enough system. And like me against, another teacher, I'd take me a lot of time. So that doesn't mean I had like the best system that you could plug and play any different educator that came out of any education, curriculum in the country. Like that's not a system. That's not the way you do it. But if we look at it, we're like, well, Matt was producing good results. It's like, yeah, but that's not a way you design state education. That's not a way you design national education. Again, downstream effects, yes. Fine. Stop talking about an individual school. Talk to me about an education system. Yes. Like stop selling out our education dollars to tech companies. Yes. And to your point, if you want these dollars, these federal dollars, your kids have to do this well on this test. To do this well on this test, it has to be done on a computer. To have them succeed on a computer, you have to get them in a computer over here. And now, by the way, to get these dollars, you got to buy all the kids' computers. Right. So there is and by the way, now you have to track, you have to do all these things. The benefit that schools get, which very few people are talking about, the benefit schools get from federal dollars because of things that we dangle in front of them, carrot in front of them, ends up costing the school half the carrot. Right. If you want kids to do really well on this test that's administered on a computer, and you have to get everybody computers and you have to maintain them and you have to make sure that they're safe and you have to make sure all these things, that costs something. Right. So the money that we're getting, it's like, are we breaking even? Are we getting like a 50% return? Like what return are we getting on all this time and energy and effort and capital that results in us getting these test scores?
I am going to say, because I know you have conversations with all sorts of different people on your show, it's one of the things that I've learned about Idaho is that we benefit from other states contributing to our, like the national general fund, because Idaho doesn't produce enough of its own funds to cover all of public education and what our schools receive. So that's something that I think is like valuable for us to remember. And that's not me saying one thing or the other when I'm talking about the Department of Education, for example. But we do benefit. And right now, the funds are frozen from the federal level to a lot of our local school districts that rely on that money to pay their bills, not to have this big excess to kind of ride on between one thing or the other. And there's some really great articles out right now. And there was a very specific example given from the superintendent of Twin Falls, and what that means right now for those federal funds to be frozen for Twin Falls, like a local community school district that is impacted by those dollars. And those dollars specifically are not tied to funding for, they're not tied to the specific, a specific test, for example. So while some of our funding is tied to different things, not all of the funding is. And I just wanted to make that distinction at that point.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. It's not all of the funding, but there are criticisms on a national level of like, hey, look, the reason we have so much administrative bloat is because we need administrators to get the funding from like these separate pet projects and programs. And so it's not like, oh, here's a grant. Here's $1 million grant. It's going to be awesome. We just have to do these things, and we have to report, and we have to record, and we have to integrate, and we have to do all these things. And it's probably going to take like 2.5 staff members. Okay. And that all in with everything, it's going to cost us $300,000 to $400,000. Okay. But we get $1 million. People look at the $1 million, it's like, you're not just getting $1 million, you're getting only $600,000. Now look, I like $600,000, and I hope every ROI is like, okay, it costs us $400,000 to get $1 million. Great. That's 250%. Fantastic. God bless it. Right. But good Lord, man, like that's part of the problem, that we have these dangling carrots that lead to bloat on a local level because they're strapped for funding. They have to do all kinds of things to get it.
Totally. I hear you 100%. One thing that I wanted to mention was that one of the places that I went to, I mentioned at the beginning, was Minneapolis, and it was the National Community Schools and Family Engagement Conference. Super cool for me on two fronts. One, I was finishing my time as the state PTA president. Mm-hmm. Yes, that's my like sly way of saying I'm no longer the state PTA president.
Mic drop.
Finished that. I completed my 2-year term, which I'm really excited about. Did a lot of awesome things with the state PTA, and I loved it. And I'm staying on the board as the director of public policy, which ties right into my PhD and all sorts of different things. So that's really cool there, and I'm excited about it. But the National Community Schools and Family Engagement Conference was cool because, one, I plan to, one of the things that I'm studying in my degree is governance. And the way that community schools operate on a local level is, from my perspective, a governance model. It's a leadership strategy, and it helps the local community interact with it helps the local school district interact with their community, which I think is pretty cool. And so I got to see like the OG guy who started community schools like over 30 years ago with a couple of other people. I got to meet someone who's like working on community schools right now and like writing a book and understand more of like how that's playing out in Idaho and how it's really awesome for Idaho and our local communities to have that. But then I also got to learn a lot about family engagement and what that means for our local communities. And to me, that ties right back into public education and making sure that public school districts are meeting the needs of their local communities. And one of the things that I have learned is that at some point, our public schools were a far better representation of our local communities than what they represent in 2025. And in part, that started when a lot of things moved to the state level and state level requirements got put into place. And so I do think that there have been a lot of things that have contributed to the decline of this link for the public to be connected to public education. I kind of wanted to circle back around to that. Yeah. So
because we have to be tied to it. We're not tied to it through obligation, but connected.
Yeah.
Like we need to be connected.
We need to be connected. And so one of the things that, like when we're talking about family engagement, is it's so important for our local schools to make sure that they are creating the environment for parents and families to want to be connected and to feel like they are connected to the school. And I have had some incredible experiences where principals and teachers have created that environment where I feel very welcomed. I feel that there's trust that's built in there and that we can work through whatever issue is there. I have 100% felt that. I have also felt the opposite, where I don't feel welcome and I don't trust the people in charge.
Right.
And that's really frustrating. And so you and I have had this conversation before where it's like, listen, we love public education and we love where our kids are. And I really believe in the premise of public education. And also, some of these parents who are really frustrated with their public education experience, yeah, I get that because I've been there too. And this is why I think it's so important for those school districts, for the school boards. It's just this whole big process where it's important for us to be tied in and connected so that we can create the positive changes that we want in our schools. And that means people showing up. That means our administrators, our teachers, our students, our parents, our neighbors, right? Our business owners, we're all showing up for that school community because that school community is the heart of at the center of our community, because our kids are so important for us to make sure that they are being brought up in a way that is going to help perpetuate this democracy that we live in, because we love the democracy that we live in. At least I do. So
yeah, listen, I'm in with everything you're saying because it's tracking. And I had a conversation the other day with somebody who's trying to drive out more voter turnout in the primaries. Not somebody connected to education. Like I know there's the whole like May Matters campaign. Not somebody, but somebody, a private person who's been at this for a long time was like, hey, this is what I know, like we have these populations that, class like a 37-year-old stay-at-home mom, she's not coming out for the primaries, right? And that's just predominantly for a number of reasons, one of which he feels that they haven't been communicated with successfully to understand the importance of the primaries. And one of his big pushes is, look, it's fundamental to our democracy that we participate in these things. And if we don't, we're going to lose that opportunity. We're going to lose that democracy, or the world we live in is going to become this much different world. And again, it's his ideas, articulating it in a way that matters to people, that, resonates. It could be on a particular issue or just on the nature of the state we live in general. But yeah, like it is really important. And the idea that the thing you want doesn't always happen doesn't mean you don't live in a democracy. It just means that, like, in a democracy, you don't always get what you want, because, like, people have to all, like, generally it's majority rules.
Totally. And I heard someone say recently, it was super fascinating. They were like, someone said, we're more divided now than we ever have been in the United States. And someone was like, that's not true. There's always been division in the United States, because there's always been a different perspective on how we want things to play out. The difference now is the way in which that division is being, in some way, I think, weaponized in a way that's like harming our ability to be able to come together. And that's why I think, and I've heard people talk about this too, like the Dignity Index has talked about this. I mean, I've talked about it on my show. I've heard different state leaders talk about this, and people who are going around having town halls around the state. We have our Save Our Schools town halls happening. We have the May Matters campaign is happening, and that's not education driven. That's just people driven, yeah. Right? That's like, and the premise that, like, hey, it's so important for us to get out to our the primary elections, but that it has to start, this level of treating people with dignity has to start on our local levels, because, and as you and I have talked before, we're not seeing it on the national level enough. We're still seeing so many perspectives and people weaponized. And not that long ago, I said, listen, it doesn't matter how we got here. Understanding how we got here, for sure, that's important. But pointing our fingers and blaming people for how we got here, that doesn't do anyone any good. And we try to teach kids not to point their fingers and blame people. And yet every day I see adults do it on the national level, on social media, and even on our state level. And I just think that's not helping us at all. We need people who are willing to tolerate the conflict, to come to the table, to have the conversation. That's what we need now more than ever.
God bless that.
Okay, but before you end this show,
I was going to say, tell me about your show. Because, having the conversation, come on now.
You're so funny. Okay, so it's been 2.5 months since we've seen each other.
Yes.
It's been 2.5 months since I've recorded a show, which was great. I finished out the season, and I think it's important to have a summer, at least for me anyways. And one of the things that has played out in my life over the last 2 years, and what's really been kind of cool, is that what I have been experiencing has been a really great thing for my kids to see play out, just in terms of we get to different points in our lives where we have to make decisions, and we have to say okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to spend my time? Is this the thing that I really want to spend my time doing? Right. Whether it comes to volunteering, our job, people switch professions all the time. Anyways. So one of the things that I realized was, okay, I know how I got here a couple of years ago. I know how I got to the Our Kids, Our Schools podcast and all those different things. But what I'm really excited about is the fact that as I really kind of have neared the halfway point during my PhD, and I had all these cool experiences on the state PTA as the president, I am wanting to make sure that the things that I do kind of align with each other. And one of the things that I do is focus on public policy and administration. And as I have learned more about this, and I kind of noticed I was doing this on my show anyways, was talking about, I wasn't using the word policy, but talking about how these different rules and laws and policies play out on this level, on the state level, and what that looks like in practice in our, what it looks like for our kids and all these different things. So I'm really excited because I'm transitioning my podcast to a new title and a little bit of an adjustment with an emphasis on public policy to practice. So it's called The Purple Zone. And the premise is that when I first started my PhD program, I read an article and it was called Into the Purple Zone. And it spoke about how when we look at politics and we look at public policy or public administration, really, there is a belief sometimes that those two things should never overlap, but the fact is they do. And if one is red and one is blue, if they overlap and work together, that makes purple. And that's the zone, that's the space that gets the magic done when we work in that space. And so to me, the purple zone premise is really kind of like it's not far one way or far another way. It's in the middle where we have to come together to it. And if the middle just means like sitting at the table to have the conversation. So I'm really excited to kind of pull apart some of these and talk about public policy, what that looks like in practice and vice versa. And then to kind of be able to share some of the things that I'm learning about through my PhD, because to me, what I've realized is it's a pretty unique PhD to be living in that space. And what I have learned in that space has deeply positively impacted what I did as the state PTA president, what I have like retrospectively looked back and understood as a, former school board member, and how I live in my space now in terms of how, what I understand from the Capitol, how I interact with different nonprofits, and how I interact even, like in the business and like education world.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I can say in the time that I've known you, as PhD candidate and, studying public policy and talking to you about what I see on the level, I have been deeply, deeply, annoyed by your degree, because I remember one bill we were talking about, and you're like, this is bad public policy. I'm like, what do you mean? This sounds great. And you're like, no, it's bad because of this, this, and this. And like, again, just sharing a perspective. It's like, stop thinking about what you like, right? Stop thinking about your personal preference. If you start looking at it from like, okay, did this legislator talk to the people that are in charge of this industry? No? Okay, that makes for bad public policy, right? Is this person being driven by an ideology or driven by data and feedback from people that are deeply affected? No? Okay, well, if it's just an idea, that's bad public policy. I'm like, damn it, man. Because it really, like, I started wondering, like, man, first off, what do you even know? And like, what's the dumb stuff you like that you didn't even realize is a bad idea? But I so appreciate it, right? Like at the end of the day, it's, I remember the first time you mentioned stakeholders. I'm like, I don't even know what a stakeholder is. It's like, well, it's the people that are affected by this thing. They got a stake in the game. And I was like, this is too much, man. I can't with you today. So I am really excited to hear about it. And I am excited to hear about the things that you bring to the table that aren't just education based, because there's so many things like that where it's like, okay, this is the policy that got put into place. This is how it played out on the local level, whether that's education, whether that's law enforcement, whether that's ag, whatever it is, because in Idaho, we are very lucky to be so connected to our legislators and the public policy and the laws that they put in place. You can see those things play out. Like in my former state with like 40 million plus people, I was never in politics anyway, but like I never saw like the boots on the ground effects. But here you get to see that. You get to follow the bill, you get to follow the practice, and then you get to see how this plays out, and warts and all. Some of it's great, some of it's not great. And we gotta iron that out. But at least coming to terms with it is like, okay, so this was the problem. This is what the bill, aimed to correct. This is like, take HB 389, Speaker Moyle's property tax bill, where it's like, hey, you can only increase budgets and taxing districts by 3% if there's no mass, population increase. If there is a population increase, I think it goes up to 7%. And then if you have foregone, you get like another one. Anyway, all these nuances. So you have fire districts right now. And his point was, look, we have to make sure growth pays for growth. We have to make sure the poor old widow who's been living here forever doesn't get her property taxes skyrocketing because other people are moving in. Like, okay, great. That was the intention of that. Everybody understands not wanting their property taxes to increase. Now we have pretty much every public service district saying like, hey, we don't have enough money, because although our budget has increased by, let's say, 3 to 8%, the population that's drawing on us has increased by 10 to 25%. That's a problem. And again, that's not necessarily education based, no. But it's like you get to have those conversations, yeah. Or, have those explorations of, look, this is the public policy and this is how it's playing out in Idaho. And I'm Alexis Morgan. This is a purple zone. I don't know. Like, I don't know how you're going to end it, but I think that's a great way.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I'll think about it. Yes.
Yeah.
And what almost feels funny to say, but, you know, the few people that listen to this episode all the way to the end and also follow me on my podcast stuff, just to know that like things just naturally switch over. So you don't have to come find me somewhere else.
Right.
Like those who are following the Our Kids, Our Schools, that whole thing is just going to switch over to the purple zone. So it makes it really cool. I've already done it like on my YouTube page. And the Idaho Lady on Instagram just stays the same because I'm the Idaho Lady. And what's so funny to me is that like when I've met people and they're like, oh, you're on Instagram. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, okay, what's your name? And I'm like, I'm the Idaho Lady. They're like, nah. They think it's so awesome. And I just feel very fortunate. Like, yeah, I'm the Idaho Lady on social media.
I remember when you got that handle and I liked it then. I like it now. I'm the Idaho Lady. God bless you, woman. Listen, it's past 5 o'clock because the blue lights went out. For those listening, that was my reference to the blue background. Anyway, I had to turn back on. You have family. You got to get home for dinner. Thank you for coming. Thank you for what you're doing for Idaho. And God bless it, man. Let's not make it another 2.5 months.
I agree. Thanks, Matt.